The church in America is going to suffer so terribly. And we laugh now, but they will come after us. They will come after our children. They will close the net around us while we are playing soccer mom and soccer dad, while we are arguing over so many little things and mesmerized by so many trinkets. The net even now is closing around you and your children and your grandchildren, and it does not cause you to fear. You will be isolated from society, as has already happened. Anyone who tries to run for office who actually believes the Bible will be considered a lunatic until finally we are silenced. We will be called things that we're not and persecuted not for being followers of Christ, but for being radical fundamentalists who do not know the true way of Christ, which of course is love and tolerance. You'll go down as the greatest bigots and haters of mankind in history. They've already come after your children, and for most of you, they got them. They got them through the public schools and indoctrination, and the university and indoctrination, and then you wonder why your children come out not serving the Lord. It's because you fed them right into the devil's mouth. So little by little, the net is closing around, and then it's not little by little. Look how fast things are going downhill just in a matter of weeks. Matter of weeks. But at the same time, know this. Persecution is always meant for evil, but God always means it for good. And is it not better to suffer in this life, to have an extra weight of glory in heaven? You must settle this in your mind. This is the one thing I want to say over and over. Do not believe. Down through history, you have a wrong idea of martyrdom and persecution. You think that these men were persecuted and martyred for their sincere faith in Jesus Christ. That was the real reason, but no one heard that publicly. They were martyred and they were persecuted as enemies of the state, as child molesters, as bigots, as narrow-minded, stupid people who had fallen for a ruse and can contribute nothing to society. Your suffering will not be noble. So your mind must be filled with the Word of God when all people persecute you and turn on you. And the Spirit of God in common grace pulls back, and you see even your children and your grandchildren tossing in the lot that you should die. This is no game. You want revival and awakening, but know this. For the most part, great awakenings have come only preceding great national catastrophes or the persecution of the church. I believe God is bringing a great awakening, but I believe that He is raising up young men who are strong in trust in the providence of God to be able to wade through the hell that's going to break loose on us. And it will be on us before we even recognize it. Unless in God's providence, He is not done. He is not done. Now note, this is not silly talk. Apart from a great awakening, these things are going to come upon you. Be ready to lose your homes, your cars, and everything.
We don't need to hear from clever men. We need to hear from the inspired scriptures. Now look here, it says the household of God, the oikos. That word is used earlier in the same chapter when it talks about an elder must manage his own oikos well. It's not talking about a house or building. It's talking about the people under his care, his wife, his children. There's an idea here that every time I read this passage, I keep getting this Hebrew name thrown up at me, Adon. He's the master of the house. When it says that this is the household of God, first of all, it reveals that there is only one Lord, one master. There is only one head to the church, to that local church. And it is Jesus Christ. It's His house and His rules. Now, I'm somewhat hospitable. I like having people over if they can bear with my wild family and all the wild things we do. Love to have people over. try to be extremely polite. But if you walk into my house and you start directing my wife, and you start ordering my children, and you start moving things around, listen very carefully. There is a sense in which I will, in the old-fashioned use of the term, I will despise you. I will say to you, who do you think that you are coming into my house? This is my house. You see that? Let me give you an example. Several years ago, there was a very wealthy business person, owned a huge media corporation. And this person one day heard a preacher, a Christian preacher, or so he identified with Christianity, say that God was a jealous God. And because of that, this very wealthy and prosperous and brilliant business person decided that, no, I do not want the God of Christianity at all. If he's God, how can he be reduced so low as to be jealous? How could he be so petty? This person doesn't realize what they're saying. Now, this person that I'm describing is brilliant, has built an empire, and has worked very, very, very hard. Now, imagine that one day, a brand new employee, it's his first day at work, he walks into the central office, and all of a sudden, he takes over. And this business magnate walks out of the office and goes, who are you? You didn't build this. You weren't even here when I started. This is your first day. How dare you be so audacious, arrogant, that you would come in here and think that you could run this company by your rules. That's exactly what's happened. That's exactly what's happening when pastors and ministers of Christ are not running the church according to sola scriptura, what is written, but according to their own clever plans or the clever plans of some successful man in their denomination who happened to build a church by not doing the Word of God. Let me give you another illustration. This name, Household of God, also denotes the intimacy that God has with the church. His love for the church. It shows him to be a husband to a bride and a father to children. That's what we see in this. Now, I have a wife, and she is beautiful. And I love her very much. And I have children, and I love them very, very much. You see, there were times my wife would go with me anywhere when we were missionaries in South America. I mean, she'd walk into danger, no problem. But there were times when I would go into certain military zones where I knew they're going to pull me off the bus, they're going to rough me up a little bit, they're going to push me around, they're going to try to show their authority. And when they do that to me, that's fine. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. That doesn't bother me a bit. But if one of them laid one finger upon my wife, well, that's quite another story, isn't it? Now, I want you to think about this, pastors. Think about this. There was a great king who loved his bride. Oh, he loved her. And he always dressed her in the simplest yet most elegant white linen. She needed no audacious colors on her face. She needed no wild hairdos. She was beautiful, simple, elegant, pure, godly, beautiful. And one day this king goes on a long journey and he calls you as a steward. He says, I'm going to entrust my bride to you. I'm going to be going. I've laid out for you in a book every rule I want you to maintain. I want nothing changed. Nothing changed. Steward, you be faithful to carry out this book. Well, the king goes, and he's been away a long, long time. And all of a sudden, the steward begins to realize that the people in the kingdom they're losing interest in the king because they're losing interest in the bride. She's too simple, too prudish, rather boring. She's out of step with the times. And so this steward thinks in his mind, aha, I've got it figured out. He calls her in. He takes off her white, elegant, godly dress and dresses her in something far more attractive to carnal men. Paints her face and then parades her up and down the street, and by doing so draws all the carnal, wicked men back into fellowship, supposedly with the king. That's exactly what countless pastors in America are doing today. They have taken the simplicity of the bride of Christ, her magnificent beauty, her purity, her holiness, and they have tore it from her, and they dress her up and parade her in front of carnal men that they will be attracted to somehow come back to God. Let me tell you something. On the day of judgment, don't worry about the atheist. Don't fear for the prostitute or the murderer. You want to fear for somebody on the day of judgment? You fear for a large number of evangelical pastors who have departed from the Word of God and are parading the church in a dress, a garb that God never intended her to wear. Many times I pray, Lord, increase your fear in me. Increase your fear in me. You should be afraid to touch my wife. Terribly afraid. Oh, but how much more afraid should you be to touch the bride of Christ and do anything with her that is not found in this book? We are to be like the faithful Haggai. Remember him? He was put over Esther. And what was his purpose? Was he to make her presentable to the nation? Was he to work with her and dress her and do all sorts of things with her that she might be pleasing to the people of the kingdom? Absolutely not. He had one task: make her pleasing to the king. Listen to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11:2. For I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy, for I betrothed you to one husband, so that to Christ I might present you as a pure virgin. Now look what else it says, pastor, minister. It's called the church of the living God. Whenever this kind of language is used, it adds a great deal of Old Testament solemnity to the matter. Listen to what Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 10:10. The church belongs to the true God. He is the living God and the everlasting King. At his wrath, the earth quakes and the nations cannot endure his indignation. He is not to be taunted or reproached, as Goliath and Sennacherib learned pretty quickly. And his commands for his church are not to be ignored and replaced with the clever ideas of men, as Nadab and Abihu and good Uzzah learned in a costly manner. Now, I want you to see here something. When it says the church of the living God, the name draws a contrast between the church and all the pagan temples that were in Ephesus. Now here's what you need to see. Here's the idea. Whenever we see in the Old Testament the living God, it's usually a challenge. He's usually stepping out with his armor on, ready to fight. And what is he ready to fight? False gods and idols. That's why we hear living God. Why is Paul using this in Ephesus? Because he's saying this. In the context of sola scriptura, in the context of exalting the scriptures as the only means to care for the church, he says this. Those temples in Ephesus, those pagan temples, those gods that are there are the inventions of men. Therefore, men can invent ways to worship them and serve them. Men invented the God. Men can just figure out how they ought to be worshiped and served. But that's not the case in Christianity. In Christianity, God is not our invention. We are His creation and the work of His redemption. He is the real, true, and living God, not an invention. And therefore, as a pastor, you have no right to think up clever ways in your church that He can be worshiped and served. You only have the right to do what is written as a steward. That is all. Now, why am I saying it this way? Brothers, a good, healthy dose of the fear of God in the pastorate would revolutionize the church in America. To fear Him. To fear Him. Now, he goes on, the character of the church. It is the pillar and support of the truth. I want to quote D. Edmond Hebert here. And just as a side note, if you're a pastor, preacher, buy every book of D. Edmond Hebert. Every commentary. He is such a blessing. This is what he says. He goes, when it says the pillar and support of the truth, this reminds us that the church holds up and supports the truth before the world and maintains the truth in opposition to all attacks upon it. Calvin says this, she is called the pillar of truth because the office of administering doctrine which God hath placed in her hands is the only instrument of preserving the truth in the world, that it may not perish from the remembrance of men. Let me quote a text from Psalms 11:3. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? What is the task of the church? She has been entrusted with a mystery. The mystery of the gospel and all the truths of the full counsel of God that are necessary in order to understand that gospel and to actually live it out. Christianity is a truth religion. Why are so many pastors laying aside the truth and becoming entertainers, laying aside the truth and expecting to draw a crowd because they wear skinny jeans, bold glasses, and they got tattoos all over their body? Unless you've been in special forces, don't get a tattoo. Or a biker gang. You don't need Jesus written on your arm. You need the law of God written on your heart.